Welcome to today's Fireside Chat, Mustard Hub Voices Behind the Build. Here I sit down with people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes, and I'm thrilled to be speaking with today's guest, Kate Halfwassen. Kate is a proven thought leader and thought partner, having held key operations and finance roles throughout her career. Her C-suite experience provides her with a deep understanding of business from the inside. She's known for championing empowerment and guiding teams towards achieving their growth goals. Kate excels at navigating the challenges of overwhelm by offering clear, actionable insights that align strategic vision with action steps across all levels of the organization. Welcome to Behind the Build, Kate. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Curtis.
I loved that. That was a mouthful, but it was what a great bio.
It's funny. There are pieces of it where I'm like, wow, is that, you always hear these things and you wonder, did I write too much? Did I blow it up too much? But it's hard to kind of put 22, 23-year career into a paragraph,
It's impossible to do that. I know. I know what you mean. Well, let's dive in. I've been really looking forward to this chat. You started out in finance,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the path that got you to where you are today? I mean, before going full time with your consultancy, you were the CFO of the Milwaukee Zoological Society. So
That's
I'd love
right.
to hear about that journey.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. I started out of college. I was hired out of college to work for GE Medical, which is now GE Healthcare here in Wisconsin. I had interned for GE before I graduated. And actually, it wasn't really my plan. It wasn't my plan at all. I firmly believe it was God's plan. I had expected to be an international tax attorney. I was going to be
Oh,
working
wow.
for, yeah. I was going to be working, I thought, for Arthur Andersen. I wanted to work in their Johannesburg office. And the summer that I was supposed to be moving to New York to intern in their tax office, the whole Enron thing blew up. So thus ended that part of it. And so thankfully, GE hired me for that summer. And I really loved the work that I was doing. I loved the people that I was working with. It was where I met my fiance at the time, my boyfriend, and then fiance, and then was offered a job. So moved to Wisconsin, having never lived here before. And I love it. And so I worked for GE for a couple of years. And then we took a year off trying to figure out, this was way back in the early 2000s when you could do things like take a year off. And, some really big companies would actually offer support throughout that. So GE was one of those. So leave of absence. And we were looking around, what are we going to do with our time? Honestly, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure corporate finance was what I wanted to do. I was working a ton of hours at GE, and I just was like, what else is out there? So I spent half my time doing some soul searching and trying to figure out, okay, what is God's plan for me? And the other half of my time, we both spent helping to launch a church plant in downtown Milwaukee. And when the year was up, I said, well, I think it's still corporate finance. I think I just want to work for a smaller company. Didn't know, but decided to. And so I worked for a company called Brookdale Senior Living. They had just come out of bankruptcy, they were just relisted a year or two before I joined with them, and was there for almost 10 years. And then ended up leaving Brookdale to work for Discovery World, which is our local science museum, as their CFO. And that was really fun. And what I learned there, coming from a mid-sized for-profit company to a pretty small nonprofit in comparison, is not so much that the operations and finance are all that different. It's just that when you have a smaller group of people, the personalities are much more magnified. If there's only 3 people on the team versus 30, someone's having a bad day, everybody knows about it, right?
Yeah.
So there's pluses
and then everybody's having a bad day by extension.
it can be. So that was a learning curve for me, having never worked for an organization or a company that small. Was able to do some really, really fun things though, in that role. And being a $9 million nonprofit, everybody had to wear multiple hats, which was something I also had to learn, coming out of a, couple, $1 billion big four, or I guess relatively big for-profit company,
Yeah.
I didn't have a team of people supporting me. I didn't have a whole accounting team, finance team. We didn't have a separate treasury department. It was kind of all me, and my couple of people. So, and I think what that really solidified for me was, for me to get the results that I want, I have to make sure that everyone is on the train. I can't just say, "Hey, the train is leaving the station. I hope you're on it," because
Yeah.
I didn't have a fleet of people to fall back on. So that was a big slice of humble pie, is how I describe a lot of what I learned in that role. And then from there, went to the Zoological Society, where it was my last W-2 role as their CFO, and was able to bring a lot of the learnings that I had gained at Discovery World. We did a lot of really nerdy finance things, like changing fiscal years and rolling out new charts of accounts. But we also did some pretty cool things on the HR side, and also on the IT side. When I started at the society, we did not have a dedicated HR person. There weren't HR systems in place, and some of my marching orders were to kind of fix this, like make it
Mhm.
better. I think one of the wisest decisions I made was HR should not report to the CFO. They should report to the CEO. So I was really delighted that my CEO ended up supporting that. And then rolled out incident response plans on the IT side, and with a ton of support. The types of things that we did would not have been possible for a single person.
Yeah.
It had the significant support of my team, of my CEO, of our board, and so we did a ton of work there. And then over this entire season, this for 15, goodness, now it's probably 17 years, my husband and I had been talking about what would it be like to work together. And I think I mentioned we met way back at GE, and it never felt like it was the right time. We have a lot of overlap in our skill sets, and it just never felt like it was right. But wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be neat if we could work together? Would we kill each other, right? Would we be able to make it work? Um, and when COVID hit, my kids were 4 and 6. And it was around that time, as I was transitioning from one CFO job to another, and where we live, the kids were being virtual schooled. My 4-year-old was not loving being on a Chromebook, and it was one of the most stressful times of my life. And it wasn't the right time for us to look at it. So that was also around the time that I took the job at the society and was able to bring a lot of value there. And kind of mid 2023, we had closed and completed a lot of the projects that I had been benighted to take on when I joined as CFO at the society. And we looked at each other and we just sort of said, "Hey, like, maybe now's the time. What do you think?" And we both, for the first time, said, "Yeah, I think this might be the time." And so the society is an organization that our family cares about very deeply. We've supported them financially for years. And I was delighted to have been tapped to have the opportunity to take on that role. I felt like I stood on the shoulders of 100 years of CFOs before me, so that was pretty cool. But I also felt like I brought a lot of value to get that organization to where it needed to be to approach the next 100 years. So it felt like, yes, we're at a point where we could consider this. So ended up giving my notice the beginning of the fourth quarter, and had a pretty long off ramp into 2024, and finally went part-time in December of 23 through mid-January of 24, and then went full-time with our consultancy in mid-January of last year. So
That's amazing. That's really cool.
thanks.
And now I get, Halfwassen and Associates. I know who your associate is. Um,
That's right. Yep.
so you're now, co-owner, chief get it done officer. One of my favorite titles. Before I talk about what you do there and who you work with, I love that this is a family business. Um, I have to know what it's like working together. My parents worked together.
Oh, really?
They seemed to do it extraordinarily well, but I've also heard some horror stories.
Hmm.
So I'd love to learn just a little bit about what it's like working together. It's nice that you were both on the same page and wanting to go in that direction.
Yeah, it was interesting, and on that point, when we were having that conversation, I remember checking it out with some friends of mine, people that I really trust, to say, "Hey, like, does this is what are the watch outs here?" Like, and to a person, they all said, wait a minute, you've been asking back and forth between the two of you for 15 years. And you finally both said yes. Like, isn't that the sign you're looking for? Like, you got a different answer, right? So, working together. So we've been married. It'll be 22 years in November. So we've been through, pretty good amount of stuff together. And I think it's funny, we don't actually see each other that much, like we're both, as a small boutique consultancy, we're both out and about quite a bit. And so it's not like we're stepping on each other's toes all the
Yeah.
time. I think we're both pretty respectful. We have access to each other's calendars, of course, and have pretty good structure with what we do. So it's been good. I know there was some concern that mostly other people had, like how is it going to go for you guys? And I don't know how it's going to go, but I probably see my husband about as much now as I did when I was working outside the home. So
Yeah.
and
That's
probably
great.
COVID was a good transition for us, honestly, because we were doing so much remote work at that time. We had
Yeah.
to figure out what it is to divvy up the spaces and figure out what our alternate office locations and stuff. So
Yeah.
um, no, it's been really good. And one of the things I really appreciate about working with Brent is, and I just went into this the other day, while we have a lot of overlap in our skill sets, Brent has, while I was working in for profits and nonprofits for 21 years, had moved out of the for profit space after GE and ended up working in a nonprofit for a few years, but then became self employed after that. MK Business Coach, or Halfwassen Associates, our DBAs, MK Business Coach, he started that in 2017. So there was a significant chunk of time where he was solely managing our family's other businesses. So in addition to our consultancy, we own several hundred acres of industrial land in Indiana. That's, as any development project is, could be 30 years in the making, 50 years even in developing. We also own a portfolio of triple nets around the country. So he was managing those for the family. And when there's a big deal going down, it's very crazy. And when there's nothing going on, there's really nothing going on, and you're looking around for things to do. And he ended up starting the consultancy in 2017 when he concluded a TIF deal, a tax incremental financing deal, at the end of 2016. So it was kind of looking around like, what am I doing with my time? And so his skill set, one of the things I really appreciate is when I have a specific question with regards to, say, the way financing might work for an appraisal on a commercial property, for example. As someone, I know it somewhat, but I haven't dealt with it as much as he has. So I can just say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? What are the watch outs? I just did this the other day for a client of ours, and he said, well, here's, you need to know this, this, and this. Now you have what you need. Go forth and meet with your clients and whatever. So having him as a resource has been great. And then for my part, I'm strong on the process side, having had to implement lots of processes throughout my career so far.
Mhm.
And so when he will have a question for one of his clients about, what's the way to approach this? How do we get through this obstacle? That's a place where I can bring him some of my experience to be able to support him in that way.
I love that. That's a great
Yeah,
that's a great balance. So tell me more about the business. What kind of services do you offer and provide?
sure. So we like to talk about ourselves. I mean, I got to pick my own title, so it's one of the fun things about being self-employed. So Chief Get Things Done Officer, which is, interestingly, throughout my entire career, you have these annual reviews or semi-annual reviews, and the thing that has always come up in my reviews as my strength and my weakness is that I get stuff done, right? And so, where of course that's been a weakness is sometimes, like I was sharing before when I was mentioning the humble pie in my CFO role at our science museum, um, I have to be very careful to read the room and recognize when people aren't on board with what I want. And it can be hard for me. My personality is I'll have blinders on. I just see this is where we got to go and we got to get there. And that's also one of my strengths, right? So if I can do that well and listen to folks and gather the feedback, be patient, the outcome's going to be better than if I just plowed forward. So I liked that title, for better or for worse. But we're also growth consultants, so that's sort of my subtitle on my business tag. And what we mean by growth consultants is we want to work with businesses that have growth goals. So where, some folks might say, oh, well, doesn't every business want to grow? And I'd say, no, not every business does want to grow. We specifically target businesses between a million and 50 million in annual revenue. We are industry agnostic. We like to work directly with the business owner. And if a business is happy where they're at, which some businesses that where the owner is ready to retire and they just want to kind of move on out are happy where they're at, those are not a good fit for us. But when there's a business that says, hey, I want to get from 2 million to 10 million, or I'm struggling because I just can't figure out how to increase my profit margin. Industry standard is 12%, and I can't seem to get beyond 7. That is a place where we love to roll up our sleeves and come alongside. For people with a corporate background, the term fractional can mean something, where I say we become a fractional part of a team. But for folks who don't have that corporate background, I just describe it as, hey, we roll up our sleeves. We can give you as much or as little support as you want. And for us, we're structured as a package. So there's not you don't get charged more. We'll let you know if we think you're taking up too much time, but we do what it takes to get the work done. I have a client who was, the business is determined by utilization rate, essentially billable time. And there was an industry standard of a particular amount, and they weren't hitting it. And in part, they weren't hitting it when we looked into it simply because the team wasn't aware of what their billable hours were for the prior week or any period of time. So no problem, give me access. And I got on the phone with the vendor, and it took a couple of months, but we got the access and we got the visibility that the team needed so that that foundational level, they could see where they were at. And that's a good example, I think, of how we roll up our sleeves. We don't love just, hey, here's your homework assignment, go forth and get it done. We've been in way too many situations where that's,
Yeah.
consultants get that bad rap for putting together a really nice PowerPoint presentation and then it gets put on the shelf, or in the circular file, even worse, and nobody does anything with it. And in our case, we want to give that, and then we also want to help people get there.
Which, for me is a big difference. I think of consultants and I think of what you just described. They roll out the PowerPoint, they tell you what you should be doing, and then they leave you to either accept or not accept those changes and do them yourself. You actually get in there and do it with them.
Yeah, to the
Um,
extent that they want it, right? So,
right.
in some cases, we're welcomed. Yes, please go in, talk to my vendors, help me out with this. And in other cases, of course, we are not skilled in some areas. One of my clients had, frankly, a branding issue, a messaging issue. I knew enough to say, you're pitching yourself as a white glove service, but the language you're using is much more, in Melina Palmer's words, it's much more value sort of focused. We need to fix this. I can give you some high level suggestions, but it would be much better if I introduced you to somebody who does this, 24/7.
Mhm.
And we did. We sat down together and she was able to get some counsel from some branding folks that I know, in order to fix some of the language there and get it more aligned with what she actually does. That's an example of where we don't necessarily, we don't know all things. Nobody would ever ask me to go recruit people for them. I would decline completely. Like, you don't want me recruiting for you, but I can get you in touch with some talented people who
Yeah.
can help you out with that.
That's awesome. So who do you work with? I want to know about some of your clients. You don't have to give me names, but what kinds of problems, challenges, and goals bring them to you, and then what do you do for them?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's see. So and it's a good question, Curtis, because sometimes I wish I knew the answer more clearly so that I would make my life easier in targeting folks. I end up telling a lot of stories about things that I've done, and sometimes things resonate with our clients. So I would say, in Kate's words, well, you didn't ask about Kate's words. Let me tell you what my clients wanted. So, yeah. All right. So what the clients, and that's probably the right way to look at it, is what do the clients actually want? The my first ever client, I think what she really wanted from what I could deliver was I understood where she wanted to go, and I had
Mhm.
some thoughts around how to get her there. And I also had the background in finance and operations that she did not, and could really put, the meat behind what I was saying. And she was one of the first ones that came when I just was fresh in the consultancy.
Like a growth challenge, or was she looking to start a business? What was
She had been in business for about 15 years, wanted to grow. The industry itself was in a sort of a low point. And so some of our work was recognizing that the industry was cyclical. And so let's take this time when there's less activity to shore up some of the language, shore up some of the structure. And one of the things we like to say that we do at MK Business Coach is we take the universe of all the things that business owners are worried about, and we narrow it down to one or two, no more than three. In my experience, it's no more than two, but we'll give people no more than three things that they really need to be focusing on. Some people like to call those KPIs, some people like to call them goals. For this first client that I'm mentioning, their one thing they needed to be focused on was recruiting. That was the one thing. Like, if you focus on nothing else, recruiting, the rest of it will take care of itself, and you've got me here to help make sure that it does, right? So you just go out and spend as much time as you can recruiting. And she's seeing the impact of that now. She's been a client now for over a year, and is really, really, it's wonderful. It's so gratifying to see the growth happening.
amazing?
Another client just kind of came to me and said, hey, I want to feel comfortable that I can spend money on things. And, which is funny because one of the things I like to say is I love teaching people how what they do every day impacts the bottom line, so that they know, okay, if I go buy this thing or I attend this conference or I hire this person, that's where that's going to impact my expenses. Let's look at pricing. And, are you priced where you need to be? I love telling people, even in my nonprofit career, I got accused of having a cold heart, but I just said, hey, we still got to get to zero as nonprofits, just like for-profits do. You price to the point of pain, price until it's painful. And if it's too painful, then you've gone too high. But if it's not painful enough, then you have not captured all of the ability you have to raise your prices. So we looked at pricing. We looked at, making sure that she understood how what she does every day impacts the bottom line. And from my experience, that type of work means, hey, let's talk through what your business actually is. Let's put projections together. Let's make sure that you understand where those are coming from. And then let's look at them on a regular basis. It's really a education that can take some time, just kind of swimming in the pool in order to get acclimated. Another client is on, probably my fastest growing client is on like a hockey stick growth trajectory, and really needed to understand of the opportunities that were presented to her to do her business, which ones both gave her joy and produced the most profit for the business. And so I actually wrote an article fairly recently on this topic and posted it on our website. And this is not a unique idea that I had, but putting together a matrix of, okay, joy's on the y-axis and profits on the x-axis. I don't care what axis you put them on. But when you evaluate the various opportunities that you have, and it could be people, it could be clients, it could be, it could be your employees, it could be opportunities, rank those. And you want to aim for that upper right. Wherever you put your profit and your joy, you want to aim for the upper right. And so getting her to a place where she, when we initially started talking about that, she said, I don't know. I don't know how to rank these things. And I said, okay, well, we'll get there, but start thinking about this. And the team has been talking about it and figuring that out. And ultimately for them, where they will get to will be that they will then be able to determine very accurately the profit part of it. They'll know, okay, well, this one, we thought it was making this amount. It's really not that profitable.
Yeah. So I would suspect that not all of your clients even have insight into and clarity even of what their problems and challenges that they face really are. I mean, do you ever have somebody that comes to you to fix one thing, but the reality is the problem something like completely different? For example,
Yeah,
like
all the time.
somebody, so they show up at your door thinking they have a problem with finding the right talent, but the issue is actually poor process, leadership, operations, whatever.
Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah,
Did I basically just
exactly.
describe your
You
business?
just did. Good job. Yep, well done. No, it's true. We like to say that, you go to the doctor with a presenting problem, right? And it turns out that the issue is actually something else. None of us like to hear that, but we have to earn the right as consultants, as trusted advisors, to speak into areas that maybe the business owner didn't think was actually the issue. Sometimes we do a good job, sometimes we don't. Um, but you're absolutely right. A lot of times as consultants, we come into it and we think, okay, this obviously is the problem. We could be done and done, with the entire engagement tomorrow. I'll put a little paragraph together and off you go, right? But that takes time, and it takes time to win people over, and humility, right? I'm not always right. I
Yeah.
think I know, but I need to be ready to recognize I might not be correct on this one. So yeah.
Mhm. It's really important, obviously, for organizations to be aligned, and it sounds like a lot of what your firm does is really help remedy misalignment. Where do you start to do that? I mean, does it begin by reminding people, reminding folks that the people aren't mind readers?
You're talking about employees in particular?
Yeah, or and leadership, to make sure that they're always, driving in the same direction.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question. Um, I'm working with one of my clients now. It's a partnership. And the two of them have had some really good success. It's a growth company. All of our clients are growth companies. But they're recognizing that they don't really know. There are some things that are irritating them, but they don't really know what where they're headed together.
Okay.
And so we were brought on to help them get to a place where they can better understand where they want to go together. Um, their relationship is really good, but they wanted to have better clarity into that. So we love a structure that became familiar with in my career: vision, goals, objective, strategies, and tactics model. I wasn't sure who to give credit to for this model. It turns out it's the military. So I guess I've already paid for it through my taxes, right? But like the vision, goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. I love that because we like to say when we're teaching on this that folks fall into one of three groups. You have sort of dreamers and visionaries who can see a really big picture, and they can see where they want to be in the next 10, 25 years, whatever, but they really struggle to figure out how the heck are they going to get there. What's the step 1, 2, and 3? And then you have folks that are more task oriented, where they kind of keep their head down all the time and they just keep churning and churning and they do the thing over and over again, but they never lift their heads up to see, why am I doing this and where am I headed? And then there are people in the middle that are more like me, I call that group small-minded people, where we can see a little bit of vision. We definitely can do the tasks, but we need someone to kick us in the pants and get us to think bigger and challenge us to take more risk. And that's certainly the group I fall in. None of these are complementary, by the way. And so the framework, vision, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, which apparently our military came up with, is really helpful to capture people at all different levels there. And so with this particular client, we've been starting off with sort of, what is your philosophy with the business? They are of the opinion, they're more about the kind of lifestyle they don't want to lead. And they're kind of learning to embrace a lifestyle that they do want to lead. And on the face of it, it doesn't seem like a very directly related to the business kind of a statement, but it's very much related to the vision, the why for their business, what their why is. And I'm not a big, smarter people than I have written great books about why, but I do think it's an important topic to chat about. And then the next thing we start talking about is where do you want to be? Where do you want to be in 12 months? And that has been a really interesting conversation for them, because with these folks, some of the frustration they've had is some of the clients that they're getting are on that joy versus profit matrix. Some of them are high joy, real low profit, and some of them are low joy and low profit, right? And those are easy. Like, let's just get rid of those. Like, you don't want anybody in the lower left. Like, we're going to get rid of all those lower left clients right now. No reason to keep those. But starting to think through, for the two of them to think through, okay, which are, of all their clients, I had them each rank it separately. Which ones do you like? And then when we think about where you want to be, probably you want more that are at least in that high joy. You may choose to take some that are low profit, but we need to pay the bills, right? So there's going to be more in that high joy, high profit. That's where we want to be. And how many of those do we want to get? And who's going to do it? And when is it going to get done by? And the beauty of that structure is you start to fill in all of those pieces. And when you have staff, right? If which this company does have staff, now you can start to assign those to people, and you can start to say, okay, Jane Doe is responsible for such and such. It's going to be done by the end of the fourth quarter. And we're going to check in with her on a weekly basis to see such and such. But it's dynamic. So when opportunities arise, things change. You're flexible. When we train on this, we say it's not like your grandma's peanut brittle. It's more like, Hubba Bubba chewing gum, where it's really flexible. You can make it really really flexible, because especially with small businesses, sometimes you get great opportunities or doors close and you have to shift.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
um, so yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I like that you talked about the why, because I actually want to address this in just a little bit. But before that, I know that employees and leaders, they need clear expectations, and talked a little bit sort of around this before, but those need to be continuously reinforced, right? So what does an organization do to begin to turn this around if it's actually not really part of their culture? Like, I'm assuming the change begins with leadership, but how do you steer them into this culture of communication, clarity, transparency, right? You talked about those three types, right? And there's a tap that just never lifts their head, right, off the table to know why they're doing things, right? So maybe their expectation is just that things have to get done.
Right.
Um, how where does the change happen? How do you steer them towards this culture, of transparency, clarity, so that everybody has those clear expectations?
Yeah. Um, I think it depends on where the leadership is. I love starting with the vision, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics framework, but sometimes that's not the right. Sometimes that's too philosophical of a place to start, and there's more of a presenting issue. If there's an actual current issue, or one of the triggers that we say is a place where we like to step in, not because we're great with recruiting, but because it's indicative of other problems. A trigger is, oh my goodness, I just lost another employee, right? We're not HR people, but typically if they've lost an employee, it's impacting their bottom line, and there's something going on with their processes. So it's not about, I just didn't get the right person in there. Typically, it's about something much deeper, which I think you're alluding to.
Yeah.
Um, and when we see that, typically what's going on is, as you said, there weren't clear expectations upfront with the employees. They didn't, it's possible that they continue to hire the wrong person, but it's also entirely possible that they hire somebody, they're on sort of that honeymoon for a couple of weeks, and then they realize that they're not doing the work. So I would say, as you mentioned, it does definitely start with the leader. They have to be humble enough to recognize that there's a problem. I'm
Yeah.
losing people, even if they don't know why. And they have to be willing to recognize that maybe, just maybe, there may be an issue with how they're being trained, and then how they're being coached, essentially, how they are internally, right? I am a huge fan of weekly one-on-ones with make sure you have a sphere of control that's correctly sized, but then meet with your team once a week. That way, if you miss a week, you're at least meeting a couple times a month.
Hmm.
And in those meetings, review those expectations that were set up front. And I love as detailed a job description as there can be. I recognize there's other duties as assigned, and in some cases, especially with higher level roles, you're not going to put everything down on a job description, but there has to be that communication of what are we doing, why are we doing it, and the reason I love doing that in the context of that vision, goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics model is those, whether they're objectives, strategies, or tactics, those are ultimately, they can be assigned out to team members, and they can see how it impacts the overall achieving of the goals for the company. But you're absolutely right that communication must happen, and there needs to be not just, hey, here's your standard operating procedure, or here's a video that you can watch, hope you get it right. You need to be touching base with them,
Yeah.
and making sure it's clear.
I like what you just said about not just what we're doing, but why everybody's doing what they're doing. Right? Going back to that why you talked about, getting everybody aligned on the why, and obviously don't just mean the company's mission there, but like you said, why everyone is doing what they're doing. Right? You shared a blog post with me, I think, that talks about
Mm-hmm.
how vital it is that people know how their efforts contribute to the bigger picture in it, right? You talk about motivation, productivity, improving when people actually understand what success looks like,
Yep.
how this lets everyone sort of move in that one direction. Does this kind of sound like what you're sort of talking about? I feel like everybody on the same page is so important for organizations to be truly successful, or at least to maximize the success. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, a story I can tell you is when I was at the society, the Zoological Society, I was asked to essentially run a internal strategic planning process. And to be clear, we, at the same time, or about a year later, were also going through a significant external strategic planning process, which I did not lead. We had outside consultants doing that. But for our internal planning purposes, um, I was the process we led, which was one that I had learned through my career, was we had changed the fiscal year, so we were a calendar year fiscal at this point, which meant that ultimately we were going to be budgeting in sort of September October time period with a goal of being done by Thanksgiving. And so starting in April, we got the senior leadership together and we talked about, hey, like what's important to us as an organization. As a nonprofit, we had, of course, our mission statement, which is not something we're going to be changing. And businesses also have that. They also have a why they do what they do. Um, and we talked about what we liked about it, what we didn't, and then kind of what was going well and what was our dream, what were our dreams for the coming year. And it was the whole senior leadership team. So sort of by extension, we had the entirety of the organization represented there. But we then sent everybody off to go meet with their teams and said, okay, our next session is going to be in June. And I want you to come back with, blue sky, all the ideas. Doesn't have to be big, it could be small. Any idea that your teams have. And we got back together, and none of this was fancy, Curtis. We just stuck some big sheets of paper up on the wall in the conference room, and we wrote down all the ideas. And what was interesting was, obviously, some of them were good and some of them were terrible, but the ones that we ended up keeping, and most of them were interesting, started to follow along some themes.
Okay.
And we were able to grab some really, really cool ideas from that. And we just said, yes, this is a really good idea. We should roll this out for next year. This is a good idea, but it's not going to work for next year. And we literally, with like colored Sharpies, we're circling in, various greens and reds and whatever. Like, this is going to fall under this particular pillar that we want to head towards for next year. So that was the senior leadership team. And then the next step was, okay, senior leaders, take the winning ideas that we came up with together, that you brought to us from your teams, and go back to your teams with the good news or bad news or whatever it is and say, this is where we're heading toward. Now your hard work is start thinking through, what is this going to mean? How many people do you need? Do you need to bring in an outside service? Do you need to buy some equipment, whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get back together in August. And when we got back together in August, that was the kickoff for our budgeting process. So by that point, everybody had however many months it is from April to August to think through where they wanted to be. People's brains were in that planning process up and down the org chart, from the lowest level on the org chart to the highest level. And so when we kicked off sort of our budget process, it was kind of old hat by that point. People were already thinking. We had a really good, template, so to speak. But as I've said to people, you cannot have the finances drive the operational plan. It has to be the other way around. The operations have to drive the finances. And so when we kicked off that process, basically the marching orders were, hey, everybody, here's your budgeting template. Our team and finance will be sitting down with you to walk you through the mechanics. But now that you've done all this good thinking, we're basically just doing math on the thinking that you've already done. You want to roll this out. You need to hire somebody. You need to hire them by March. You're going to pay them this amount of money. Da 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 da. And to me, that is the best way to start to
Mm-hmm.
take what everybody wants to do and put it into numbers. So then when we would look at our being a budget season, we were meeting more frequently. So we met again in September and then October, looking at multiple different versions of the budget. Had to skinny some things up, had to be a little bit more aggressive on some other fronts. But by the time we were done, the forecast or the budget that we had for the coming year was reflective of every single person's thoughts throughout the organization. Everybody had been involved in the process of building that out. And we used the vision, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics framework in order to get there. So those folks then who had tactics directly related to the achievement of these goals, that went on to their annual review plan. We were using in our HRIS system, those goals went into what they were going to be measured against. Now, not everything everybody does every day is going to be related to that high level goal for the company. but a couple of them likely will be. And so by putting it into then their goals and what they were going to be achieving from sort of that personnel side, we had it locked in that they were then going to be measured to that throughout the
Yeah.
year. So we went right from the budget setting process directly into goal setting, individual goal setting for our employees, and then we're able to start the next year in January and hit the ground running, where everybody knew exactly what they needed to do
It,
and how that would impact the bottom line.
it is in this particular story. What's really interesting is that process was so democratic, where it's not even getting everybody on the same page with clear expectations, but allowing them to be part of that process into creating what those expectations are, which can be really, I'm imagining, pretty powerful for that organization, right? Everybody has sort of a contribution, right? Everybody was part of that or had a contribution to make in defining what those expectations look like. So at
I
least
like
it sounds that way.
it is, and not every company is going to want to budget that way or plan that way or um, goals together that way. My personal feeling is that companies are missing out when they don't seek that kind of input from across the organization. Um, I think a story on that would be in my other CFO role at our science center. Some of the best ideas come from the least likely places. When I started at the Science Museum, we still owned a recreation tall ship. It's called the Dennis Sullivan. It was a recreation of a late 1800s schooner on the Great Lakes. It was kind of like the semi trucks of the Great Lakes. Um, and when I started, it was losing six figures a year. And as a
Oh, wow.
nonprofit, our job is just to get to zero, right? So one of the things where you wouldn't typically think a CFO would be doing this kind of work, but in a small company or small organization, everybody wears lots of hats. So I pulled together a group of people. We had people from our sales team. We had people from, of course, from the crew of the ship, ops, of course, my finance team, and it was just a brainstorming session. What can we do to work this out? Obviously, there's some math. We can look at pricing and whatnot, and we did do that. But coming out of that session, somebody had the idea, hey, Milwaukee, we're known for our great beer. We should serve beer on the boat, right? We would call it the boat. Like, we prefer to be called the ship, but we would call it the boat internally. We should serve beer on the boat. And we were like, I wonder what's involved with that. Obviously, we could charge more if we could serve alcohol on the ship, but I have no idea
Mhm.
what is involved in that. And so we ran with it. And I will tell you, Curtis, I lost so many brain cells trying to navigate the liquor laws in the state of Wisconsin. It was really something, but we did it. And between
And
that,
probably a few for being on the boat and having a few of those beers too.
oh, did you go? That's
No,
good.
I'm just saying that that would probably contribute to some of the brain cell loss, but
No, actually, it's funny. I get really motion sick, so I'm doing all this work, and I didn't even go on the ship ever
Oh, wow,
until
okay.
it was months. They finally, the captain kept giving me a hard time about it, and I told her, I was like, I can't do it. I will not
You
make
had to
it.
sell beer and Dramamine.
That Dramamine doesn't work. It had to. There was a prescription that I ended up getting that worked for me.
Okay.
I finally was able to take one. But what ended up happening with that was both through thinking creatively about how we could use that. We looked at partnerships as a group. We looked at what costs can we cut, if any. We looked at our insurance coverage and whatnot. We had earthquake insurance on the ship, which we don't get
Wow.
earthquakes here. So one of those things we kind of took a look at. Um, we were charging the same amount for a Tuesday afternoon sale as a Friday night sunset sale. And we were like, no, no, no. Like, date night sales should be more. And between all of that effort together as a group, we went from losing six figures to actually making, ten or $20,000 on the ship. So as a
Wow.
nonprofit, we were like, great, thumbs up, we did it. And that was a big achievement. So I tell that story as an example because that serving beer on the boat, right? That idea wasn't my idea. It came from someone in our sales team who just happened to be thinking blue sky and came up with this idea, and it turned out to be a great one. And when business owners, CEOs, whatever, when they don't reach out to their teams, if they don't reach out at all levels and create a culture where people can and are proactively asked what they think about such and such, or do they have any ideas? They miss out on all those really great ideas that are out there, and I think they can potentially hamstring the growth of their business.
So, on this topic, since we're a tech company, I want to do a little bit of talk tech
Sure.
quickly. A lot of platforms, Mustard Hub included, help to build alignment, open up communications, reinforce values, help teams get on the same page. How are you seeing organizations use tools, and platforms? Are they doing it right? What could they do better?
Yeah. Um, I would say the ones that use it well have implemented it well. So many organizations, um, not just with HR and goal setting and alignment systems, but with project management and whatnot, get really frustrated because they don't understand the implementation, or they kind of
Mhm.
abandon their CRM. Or that's a great example. We rolled out a new CRM, but nobody uses it, and our salespeople are back to using post-it notes and
Yeah,
spreadsheets. And the reason why is because they don't understand it. They haven't taken the time to really dig into it and understand it. So to me, that's the key. Is it with a tool like what you have, making sure that everyone understands how it works, just like anything else, like we've been talking about, setting that expectation. In this case, I would say implementing it, making sure that people understand it, and then having regular check-ins that demonstrate the strength of that tool, and making sure that the utilization is there, will make it more successful. And that's the case for any tech that folks roll out.
yeah. That's stated pretty well. I mean, there's going to be low adoption, inconsistent adoption sometimes. So getting everybody on the same page with how to best use it, I think, is kind of critical from the beginning. I know that technology is going to keep evolving, becoming increasingly vital to how orgs stay competitive, and AI is definitely going to be changing a big part of this. Have you been tapping into this in your consultancy? How are you guys using it?
AI in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sigh.
no, it's a good question. I think AI is not where I want AI to be, right? So, in my opinion, I sigh, I guess, in part because everybody's all excited about AI, but I feel like it has. I'm the only one I know who thinks AI has so far to go. I want to be able to pick up my iPhone and say, okay, um, tell me who I'm meeting with today, when the last time was that I met with them, what you think I should be bringing up or not forgetting. Um, And oh, by the way, please make sure that you've added milk to my grocery list,
Yeah.
and
Pick up my dry cleaning.
remind me to call my son's teacher to ask about such and such. Right? Like basically, I want it to function like a really great executive admin, and
Mhm.
we're so far from that. Why are we so far from that? I don't know. I feel like all my apps are on my phones. Like something should be able to see all of
Mhm.
that, or like in a corporate setting, um, you know, there are so many subsystems, even with Microsoft's Copilot. Honestly, I'm just not that impressed with it. Sorry, Microsoft, but I want to be able to, in my finance roles, I want to be able to say, okay, Copilot, go pull a financial analysis together for me that takes a look at the profit margins for this business unit versus that one, what the growth has been over the last 12 months, and then put together a growth projection for me for the next 12 months, and have it in a nice. You can leave it in a spreadsheet is fine, but that's what I'm looking for. Um, and the systems just aren't there. So what do we use AI for? We use AI mostly to, um, honestly, as a sort of an editor of some of our text. Um, I don't use it for cold calling. I don't use it for, I don't really use image generation or anything. I know those tools are out there, but I will use it as some something that I can bounce ideas off of if I'm trying to figure out another way to approach a particular problem. Or um, the other day, I was asking it for sort of an obscure answer to a tax question, which then, of course, I went to go double check and make sure it was the correct answer. But I use it as a sort of a reference, and I typically use ChatGPT in our consultancy.
Yeah. As we sort of wrap up here, I have kind of a big question in a few parts, I guess. Kind of keeping an eye on what's next. I'm
Mhm.
curious your thoughts on maybe what tomorrow's leaders need to understand about people and culture that maybe many of today's leaders might be missing. Do you think there's misconceptions that exist amongst business leaders when it comes to people dynamics, and so forth? And I guess last, if a leader came to you on advice on how to truly kind of get it right from the beginning with these folks, you're on an elevator almost at the top floor. What do you tell them right before you hit the top and they walk out the door?
I'd say put yourself in the employee's shoes, your staff's shoes. If that's all I had, if the door was opening, that's what I would say, right? Put yourself in your staff shoes. Um, and I think that can encompass the expectations and training aspect we were talking about at the top. I think that it can encompass how you approach someone. If you've really put yourself in someone's shoes and they're having a bad day, let's find out what's going on, and is there anything we can do to be empathetic with it. Um, and doesn't mean that you're a carpet that people wipe their feet on, but
Right,
it does
right.
mean that um, you're approaching it. You're trying to walk in their shoes and understand where they're coming from. So I think one of the challenges, and something I coach every now and then, and our consultancy is a little bit interesting because I believe we bring our whole selves to our businesses. This is true in gigantic for profits. It's true in small nonprofits and anything in between. We bring our whole selves to work, and so sometimes my coaching takes on sort of an executive coaching, like kind of a model where it's not therapy, but it is. We do bring ourselves into it, um, and your team doesn't have to like you. You don't have to go out for margaritas, right? It's cool if you do, but they don't have to. But they do have
Mm.
to respect you, and they have to do what you're going to tell them to do. Ultimately, right? I mean, do it with all the empathy that you can, and there's lots of ways of doing that. So where sometimes some business owners I think can fall a little bit is they want their teams to be their best friends, especially if they've been promoted into a role, um, and that's hard, and that's really where coaching and consulting can really help to backstop people to say, no, you're not crazy. This person is supposed to do that. Let's come up with some strategies where you can empathetically but firmly, you know, achieve this goal that you're looking for. So, um, yeah, walk in someone else's shoes.
I love that. It's leading with empathy, curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Kate. And I appreciate you taking all the time. This was
Oh, it's my
fun.
pleasure. Thank you, Curtis. It was really nice to meet you.
Well, for all of you who are watching or listening to this episode, thank you all for tuning in to Mustard Hub Voices Behind the Build. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Be sure to check us out at mustardhub.com to see how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. And get started with Mustard Hub for free. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Thank you.